IBA is. So we are a part of the southernmost Edwards Plateau IBA, important bird area. And so this IBA was first proposed in 2011 to protect or at least identify important breeding habitats here within the southern part of their range, the southeastern part of their breeding range. So now let's talk a little bit more about golden-cheeked warblers themselves. So golden-cheeked warblers were first were listed as federally endangered in 1991. And this was largely in response to the rapid habitat destruction that was occurring through their breeding habitat. So golden-cheeked warblers are the only species of bird that breed exclusively here in Texas. And more specifically, they breed exclusively here in central Texas, mostly here on the Edwards Plateau. Some of them get a little bit farther north into the cross timbers, but their breeding density in the cross timbers is usually it's on the low end. The bulk of their population breeds kind of in our area. They otherwise winter in Central America, and I say winter here, although to be more honest, that's where they spend most of the year, not just the winter. So why do they only come here? Is largely because at one point their ancestors used to breed pretty widely throughout much of the United States. But then a few million years ago, we entered a particularly nasty ice age in which glaciers covered most of the central part of the United States, and they weren't really well adapted to breeding and nesting on top of glaciers. And so they basically their population got kind of split, with some being forced into a few climate refugia on the East Coast. Those became different species, the black-throated green warblers, and then the ones who got pushed to south eventually settled here in central Texas, and they became our beloved golden-cheeked warblers. And while they are here, they apparently discovered that the bark of mature ash junipers makes for a fantastic nesting material. And over time, they became very dependent on this material. And so that's why golden-cheeked warblers can really only be found, can only really breed here in central Texas. And that's because this is where you find ash juniper. We do find ash juniper in Oklahoma and a few other scattered places in the United States, but the ash juniper in those locations is not dense enough in order to support the warbler. So that's why they're primarily found here. So when we're looking at warbler habitat, we are generally looking for mature oak juniper woodlands that perfectly old growth, but there's not much old growth woodland left. It's mostly, but there's at least a good amount of mature. We're looking for about 70 to 80% juniper and 20 to 30% hardwoods, which is the hardwoods are particularly important for them to find enough food. Okay, so why are golden-cheeked warblers endangered? So, one of the big causes, especially for them being listed in the first place, was due to the rampant habitat destruction occurring here in the hill country. Everybody kind of wants their piece of the hill country. And unfortunately, there's kind of this culture that junipers are universally bad. And so just widespread development and clear cutting of junipers has led to a decline in golden-cheeked warblers. There's certainly a lot of political pressure from developers to keep developing further. And we have kind of seen how this has affected them over the last 100 years. We have seen a decline in their genetic diversity, which means that there's fewer warblers, they're not as well connected, they're not really interbreeding as much, and so this could hurt them in the future. We also know that nest survival decreases with increasing forest edge. And so as we continue to fragment these forests and woodlands, they're being exposed to more predators, to brood parasites, and to other threats like that. And so they do have a decreasing population trend. And they are listed on the IUCN as endangered. Just showing some of the development pressure. However, probably the bulk of the pressure on their population is actually coming from their overwintering range. So they only really overwinter in just a handful of kind of mountaintops here in Central America, just kind of this little sliver of area. It's an area even smaller than their breeding range here in Texas. But they breed in similar habitat, or not breed, they overwinter in similar habitat, generally in high elevation oak pine woodlands. Unfortunately, these pine oak woodlands are highly valued for logging, as well as they're under threat from agricultural conversion. And so we are seeing sharp declines in their overwintering habitat. And as if that wasn't bad enough, a study by the National Audubon Society a few years ago basically took habitat trends, predictions based on climatic predictions to show how habitats for different species would change with different degrees of warming. And National Audubon Society pretty much concluded that if we hit 3 degrees of global warming, that could reduce their overwintering habitat by almost 100%, because those oak pine woodlands are probably going to start converting to other types of ecosystems by themselves, even without, the axe or the plow. So basically, there is a pretty substantial threat to their continued existence. We can certainly help here, even if we can't stop climate change here or, stop logging down in their overwintering range. The more habitat we can protect here, the better their genetic diversity is going to be. And we know that species with greater genetic diversity are generally more adaptable. And so hopefully we can still make a difference here. So as I said, they are listed as endangered by both the IUCN and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. In January of last year, they were proposed for downlisting to threatened status, which means that they're not at imminent risk of extinction, but they are at risk of extinction in the future. And so it's kind of a disappointing, if not unsurprising, proposal from U.S. Fish and Wildlife. The decision was based on some very limited and potentially biased data, but that's because they didn't really have much to go off of in the first place. So if this proposal gets accepted, it could accelerate habitat destruction in the hill country. Probably not to a huge extent, but it could definitely have a detrimental impact. So we're hoping it doesn't go there. So moving on to the actual survey. So we've talked about the birds, why they're only found here, why they're endangered. We talked about the value of these surveys. We want to keep tabs on what their population trends are doing at our sites, so that we can see any long-term changes. So now let's talk about the how of how we're going to do this. So we'll cover the protocol, the equipment, how to get places, and how to collect and submit data. So first of all, where are we monitoring? So what sites are a part of the IBA? So we actually have quite a number of sites now. We have, and these include some sites on state land, although we really haven't received data from ABK in a few years. They kind of got really cagey. But Government Canyon still sends, we're still working with Government Canyon, so we still share data. Bracken, we do service at Bracken Cave, at Eisenhower Park, Friedrich Park, Crown Ridge Canyon, as well as one private ranch, as well as a few other kind of sites around San Antonio. So most of our sites are on this urban wildland interface, kind of here in northern Bexar County. And so we are kind of focused on seeing how their population trends are changing so close to our urban area. So I'm not going to get really into the U.S. Fish and Wildlife stuff too much. Let's just skip ahead to our protocol. So generally, the goal of our surveys is to conduct, so we conduct our surveys through point counts. And generally, we do 5 point counts, or rather, we survey each point location, ideally about 5 times every season. So generally, surveys are conducted from March 15th, coming up pretty quickly, and they end, the last day for collecting data is June 15th, although we really do prefer that most of the surveys are done earlier in the season. You can do the surveys anytime within the first 7 hours of sunrise, but we do know that their singing activity declines throughout the day. And so we really recommend getting started around sunrise if you can. That's also when it's cooler and nicer to be outside and safer. So generally, that's the best time to do it. We generally require a minimum of 1 hour per visit, although that's really not important. And I might actually, as long as you get the point counts done, it doesn't really matter how much time. I might actually remove that in the future. Our goal is a minimum of generally 5 visits to each point location, with at least 5 days between visits. So, and generally, you want to do the surveys during, good conditions. So you don't want to do it outside if it's so windy you can't even hear yourself talk. So if the winds are strong enough to be able to lift paper off the ground, they're usually too fast in order for us to be able to hear the bursts effectively at distance. And so try to do your surveys when the wind speeds are less than 12 miles per hour. Obviously, don't do it if it's raining. Even if it's just kind of drizzling, golden cheek warblers don't like to really sing at that time, so it's not a great time. And also not if we get like a weird cold snap where it's less than 45 degrees. Golden cheek warblers don't really like singing when it's cold out. They don't really care if it's hot out. Like they'll happily sing even when it's like 98 degrees outside. So the upper temperature limit isn't really as important, just as long as you're not doing it when it's really cold. Okay, so we do the point count. So each point count is a 3-minute point count during the 3 minutes, you will be recording all golden cheek warblers that you find. So, males and females, auditory and visual sightings, adults and fledglings, at any distance. They could be on a distant hillside or they could be perched on your head. Basically, if you detect a golden cheek warbler, you can record it. So that's in contrast to a lot of other protocols, which are just focused on singing males. So in terms of what you'll be recording, we'll be recording when we start the point count, the age and sex of all warblers that we detect, how we detected them, if you can, the distance interval, as well as their direction. And I'll get more onto this later. So let's see, we're going to skip that. As usual, communication is important. So please keep in close communication with other volunteers at your site for scheduling and for site coverage, as well as for safety. And don't hesitate to contact me. You can really contact me at any time. Okay. Let's see. In terms of equipment, basically the main thing is having the data sheets. So the data sheets are provided. They're provided in in the folder that was sent to you. They just need to be printed out, or you can also use your phone as well as a clipboard and pencil to write with. You need to know where the points are. So that might be a map of the survey points. It could be something you have on your phone. It could just be your memory. Just whatever works for you. So we do have maps of where all the points are, and usually you can use like a Google map to know where you are on the trail system and make sure you hit all the points. But in general, we'll generally be traveling with people who've done these surveys before, so you don't have to figure this stuff out on your own. All right, a compass, it can either be a physical compass or a smartphone app. I usually use a smartphone app these days. Usually works just as well. And that's mostly for getting the direction that warblers are singing from, as well as drinking water and any other safety gear that you need. And I did put binoculars as optional. I don't want to say that you cannot assist if you don't have binoculars, because really anybody can help with these surveys. I want to make these surveys as accessible as possible. And generally, 99% of the time, you're going to detect a golden cheek warbler with your ears rather than with your eyes. And so binoculars are definitely strongly preferred, so definitely bring them if you have them, especially if you're not entirely certain on on identifying them by ear. And if you really want to get a good look at them, and tell them apart from a few other similar birds, binoculars can be useful. All right, so how do we actually get to points? And so there's kind of different ways. If you use something like Gaia GPS or some other GPS app where you can just kind of load points in and it'll show you how to get there on the trail system, you can do it that way. I do have a file that contains the GPS points in your folder. If you want to do it that way, that's fine. But that's generally but the traditional way that we've always done them is just simply to use our maps here. So basically, you pick your route. Usually, you're going with somebody who's done the route before, so you're not always having to learn this by yourself. But if you are having to figure out where these points are by yourself, you can follow the map and you can kind of compare the landmarks on the map to what you're seeing, around you and perhaps on like Google Maps. And from there, you can usually figure out where you are on the trail system and where the points are in comparison. All points are on trails, so there's no so you don't have to go cross country and swim through the juniper. I'll be doing that this season, all across Eisenhower Park, but for most of you, will all be on the trails. Usually they are at distinctive bends and intersections or other landmarks. So usually you can kind of, even if you don't have like a GPS, you can usually still figure out where the points are. And, coordinates can be provided, like I said. All right, so how to record data. So most people generally prefer to record them with the paper data sheets that are provided. That's usually the kind of the simplest and most straightforward approach. If you would like to forgo the paper sheet and use an app, you can do that as well. We do use the Survey 123 app, which can be used in the field. If you're interested in that, there are instructions in your Google Drive folder on how to do that. But generally, paper data sheets are kind of the way that we've traditionally done them. And usually when you're going through the data sheet, you want to make sure that you fill out all the boxes for each point count, even if you didn't detect any birds. So we'll kind of just break down the data sheet real quick. I'll look at the questions and answer them at the end of this presentation. For now, I'm just going to kind of keep chugging along and hoping that what I'm saying is making sense. Okay, so this is kind of what the data sheet looks like. And basically, it's kind of broken into two sections. You kind of have the metadata, so like the site conditions up on top, and then you have where you enter the point counts down here on the bottom. And so for each 3-minute observation at each point, as a reminder, there are 3-minute point counts with unlimited radius, all Golden-cheeked warblers. You want to make sure that you record the start time of each point count, as well as make sure you know the difference between null and 0. And so if you do a point count, like let's say you start your point count and you didn't detect any Golden-cheeked warblers, make sure you write 0 in the Golden-cheeked warbler box. Don't just leave it blank. We need to know when you found an absence, not just, if it's blank, I won't know if either you didn't find any or maybe you did hear them, you just forgot to write it in. I won't know. So make sure you write 0 if you did not detect any Golden-cheeked warblers. So going with the metadata, usually the standard approach is just to use like your senses and a weather app. So, you record your start and end times, the site, what site you're at, who you are. You can use a weather app to get like basic temperature and wind speed for your area. It doesn't have to be super precise for your site, as long as it's, generally representative of what's going on in the area. I generally consider that to be fine. If there's any, you really shouldn't be out if it's raining or drizzling or foggy, but if it is, like it just gets drizzly or foggy partway through the survey, certainly still circle that so that we know. And then record the cloud cover percentage, which can just be estimated. You can use standard weather codes if you want, or if you have like a Kestrel or some other data logger, you can also use that if you want to get really precise measurements. But those aren't required. Okay, then in terms of the actual recording the actual data, so we just have a few examples down here. And like I said, if this is your first time doing these surveys, you will be with somebody who's done them before. So we're not expecting you to learn it all just from this presentation. But just as an example, for example, at point A, it started at 7:58. They heard one Golden-cheeked warbler. Make sure that you're not double counting the same warbler. Like if you hear a warbler singing, at the start, and then it goes quiet, and then a minute later you hear a warbler again, try to figure out if it's the same warbler or if it's two different warblers. Like if it's singing from the same location that was before, it's probably the same individual. If it's singing from completely the other side of you and much farther away, then it's probably a different individual. But usually if one warbler is singing, there's usually the others in the area are counter singing them. And so usually you can tell how many warblers are around. But in any case, in this example, there was one warbler. A stands for auditory, so it was heard. And then if you want to record what song type, you can. That's not required, but it's useful information. And so in that case, it's the A song. And I'll cover what the different songs are later in the presentation. Don't worry about that right now. So they also recorded the direction, which is in degrees, so 170 degrees. And they said it was over 50 yards away. So in point count B, they did not detect any golden cheek warblers, so they recorded 0. And they can either say null here or just like draw a line through them just to indicate that they didn't find any. Point count C, they had 2 visual detections, a male and a female in this case, at 280 degrees and pretty close together. Then in D, it's 2 auditory B songs, probably countersinging each other. Then here they record the direction to and distance to each of the 2 warblers. And then so forth. Here they read null because the trail was closed off. All right, let's see. Did I miss anything here? I don't think so. I think that's kind of the basics of how to do it. If all these different codes get confusing, you can also just record the number that you detected. So you can also just say like 3, and that's fine, or 1 in this case, 2 in this case. If you want to add the codes, that's useful but not required. Okay, you can also fill out record incidental birds. So these are golden cheek warblers that you detect between points. Just make sure that they are unique new individuals and that they're not an individual that you heard during a point count, if possible. All right, and there basically you just have to, at minimum, you just have to say which 2 points you're between and how many warblers you found. And if you want to include lat long, coordinates, that type of stuff, you can, but it's not required. For the incidental data, all you have to say is where you basically are and how many you heard as incidental. Okay, and that's just an example of the incidental data sheet. Again, these 3 columns over here are optional. The main stuff is over here. In this case, it was like between this parking lot and point A. Heard at 8:20, they saw 5 visual, 1 male and 4 fledglings in that example. Okay, so let's say we go out, we do all these surveys, we collect the data. So how do we actually submit it? So there's 3 ways you can submit it. One is through the data portal, which is in the folder that you've all been given access to. You can also manually enter it into an Excel workbook, also in your folder. Or you can also just email or send me the physical data sheets, and I would be perfectly happy to enter them for you. So we'll start with method 1. So this method is particularly good for people who have never used Excel before. It's a little bit slower than using Excel to enter the data, but it's much simpler and easier to do. So basically in your Google folder, which I'll talk about the Google folder later, there will be a link to the data portal. Basically, you will be submitting one form for every point count you did, including point counts without detections. So make sure that you still submit the absences as well. That's just as important as the point counts where you did hear something. And basically, you'll just be going through this form. It's kind of like the form you might fill out at a doctor's office. It's kind of similar. And basically, you just enter your data in there. And it's pretty easy, intuitive once you do it. We'll go through an example in a second. So you only need to enter the survey metadata for the first point count of each day. So, as you get back home, you get to your computer, you look at your first point count you did. For that point count, you'll enter your metadata, like where you were at, what was the weather like, that type of stuff. And after that, for subsequent forms, you just have to do each point count. You don't have to fill out the weather each time, just for the first point count for a given day. And at this point, we can just run through an example real quick on the form. I just have to make sure that I'm sharing the, let's see. Can people see this?
You need to put it on presentation mode. It's in the data. You can see the little slides.
Okay, yeah, I'm trying to figure, oh, here we go. Now I can share, I should be able to share a new folder from here.
Yeah,
All right, there we go.
can't see it. There it is.
All right. So we'll just go through the portal real quick. Again, it should be in your folder. There's a link in there. You just click it and it'll bring you to this little page here. And so the first question is this your first survey for the day? If it is, you press yes. And that will allow you to enter like the weather data. If you can also submit, point counts versus incidentals. For now, we'll ignore the incidentals. We'll just do a standard point count. So we'll ask you what park you're at. So we'll do Friedrich here. You can list who you are, and as well as if there's anybody else with you. When it is, this person did it way too early before the official start date, so I'm afraid I'm going to throw out their data, but oh well. They also did it at 7 p.m. for some reason. We'll say they took way too long. They got lost out at Friedrich Park, so it took them several days to finish the survey. And starting temperature, you basically just, you enter the temperature that at the start and at the end, so forth like that. Same thing with wind speed and cloud cover. It'll ask you if there's any precipitation. And so once you fill this out for the first point count, you don't really need to do it a second time. And so then we get into the actual point count data. So we will say which point you were at. So we'll say we're at point C, the start time for that point count, and how many were detected. So how many warblers you say you detected will determine on how many boxes will appear below it. So we'll say that they were 2 golden-cheeked warblers. And so here we'll say, detection type. We'll say we heard the first warbler and saw the second one. If you know the songs and recorded them, you can list them here. But again, it's not necessary. And we'll say the first one was male, the second one was female, and they are both adults. And so then you can do the azimuth, the actual, which is the degrees, compass degrees to each one, and then their distance. And that's pretty much it. Then you would say submit. And after that, just say dummy data here. I should say thank you and should take us back. And you can press here the button to restart the survey and enter the data from your second point count. And this time you can say no to, is this your first entry for this survey? And you can jump straight to the point counts again. And so, yep, it's pretty easy this way. Let me go back to the main presentation. Just need to change my window again. All right, so that was how to use the data portal, how to submit data that way. Now, if you've been around for a while and you've used the Excel workbook, that method is also viable too. It is faster than going through the portal because you can just enter your data line by line, but it is a little bit more complicated. So if you're already a whiz at Excel or Google Sheets, feel free to use this method. I'm not, and like most Excel workbooks, there are multiple tabs, where you enter your data in the metadata tab, that's generally going to be 1 row per survey day that you go out. That's where you enter your weather stuff. And then you would go to the data tab and it would be 1 row per point count. And you just record, your information, how many warblers you found at each point count and, type, sex, age, so forth. Yeah, and then you can also record your incidentals this way. So, whether you want to use the data portal or the Excel workbook is up to you. Both of these are located in the Google Drive folder. And I've I've sent out all the links to the Google Drive folders to everybody, so everybody should have access to them. If you don't, let me know and I'll remedy that. So each folder contains the reference materials, like the protocol and stuff like that, the survey data sheets, or if you want to use the survey 123 in the field, there's a link to that as well as the Microsoft Excel workbook or the data portal. So you can find all that stuff in your Google Drive folder. And if all that, and if you don't understand how to do that, or if you can't make it work, like it just isn't going through for you, you can also just send me your data sheets and I can enter them for you. Easiest way is just to take a picture of them with your phone and then just like email the pictures to me and I can enter them for you. Or if you want to mail them to me, that's fine as well. So with that, we pretty much have covered the methodology of how we do the surveys. And so now we'll be talking about how to identify golden cheek warblers, probably the most fun part. So what they look like, what they sound like, how to tell them apart from other species, what their favorite types of parties are, that type of stuff. So 99% of the time, you will be hearing a golden cheek warbler long before you see them. So generally, the way that we know golden cheek warblers is primarily through their songs. And so golden cheek warblers basically have two types of songs that they do. The first we call the A song, which is used mostly for advertising to females and declaring their territory. It's usually used more at a distance, as opposed to the B song, which is generally more aggressive and tends to be used more often in male-to-male interactions, usually at closer range. These are wide sweeping generalizations here. I've also seen golden cheek warblers belt A songs at each other staring each other in the eyes and belting out A song. So sometimes they use A song at short range. Sometimes they use B song, even when there's no other warblers within the area that we can, as far as we can tell. Sometimes they'll use these songs, for other birds too. It's quite variable. We don't fully understand why they use A songs sometimes and B songs at other times, but these are kind of the generalizations here. And so the A song is pretty distinctive. You can kind of remember it by the I'm so crazy. And that's kind of what it sounds like. We'll go ahead and listen to it if it works. Yeah, so if you can kind of just remember that mnemonic.
We can't hear it. We can't hear
Okay.
it through the computer. You have to share the sound on your computer when you share the PowerPoint.
Oh, yeah, I remember having to do that before. Share sound. There we go. I have that. Okay, let's try that again. This time you should be able to hear that. Sorry, I only use Zoom once a year and it's for this presentation, so I kind of forget a few of these little nuances. All right. It's going to be pretty loud when it starts off, so, just be ready. All right. All right. Hopefully everybody heard that. At least it has that nice little mnemonic that's easy to remember. The B song also has a mnemonic, but I don't remember what it is. Somebody told it to me last year, and I was like, "Wow, that's actually quite fun." But then I forgot to write it down. So if anybody remembers what the mnemonic is, feel free. Please do tell me. Okay, but in any case, the B song tends to be. Well, let's play it first, and then we'll describe it. I'm starting it now. Yeah, so it's a little bit more grumbly. It's not quite buzzy, but it's much. Dang, I studied all the specific terminology to different parts of bird songs and how they're classified, but it's all drained from my head at the moment. Sorry, I can't quite remember the right words that I need, but basically you'll want to be practicing these songs. Use Merlin app, use whatever app you use. Just listen to these songs, get familiar with them. Once you hear them, once you go through a season of hearing them, you'd be able to recognize them in your sleep. They're quite distinctive, quite easy to quite easy once you get the hang of it. And again, if you're new to these surveys, you're not going to be out alone. You're usually going to be out with somebody who's done these before. So, everybody has an opportunity to learn the songs. I wasn't expecting it to play again. Sorry about that. Okay. They also make other vocalizations. Usually, the most common is usually kind of a chip call, a contact call that they use just to keep in communication with each other, the males and females usually, although the males will also chip really aggressively sometimes, especially when they're up in another warbler's face. So it's used for all different types of situations. If you follow golden cheek warblers around for a few years, like I do, slinking through the junipers, following them around, mapping their territories, you get to learn their chips as easily as you know the songs. Like I can tell a golden cheek warbler's chip from the chip of any other bird, but if you're not following them around every day all season, then their chip sounds a lot like the chip calls of other birds. So generally you won't use these most of you won't be able to identify them based on their chip calls, but it's still good being familiar with it so that if you do hear little chips coming from the trees, you can at least gives you a clue that there's a bird there. So we'll listen to it now. Not the best. Yeah, there's a little one there. More cars, but okay. Okay, so now that we've covered what they sound like, let's talk about what they look like. So golden cheek warblers are, on the whole, pretty distinctive, handsome birds. There's really only one bird that they can visually be confused with, and that's their closely related black-throated green warbler. Like I said at the very beginning of the presentation, at one point they were one species, but then once the glaciers appeared in the central United States, some of them got pushed east, some of them got pushed south. The eastern ones became golden cheek warblers. The eastern ones became black-throated green warblers. And so they still look and sound very similar to each other. Visually, they're usually pretty easy to tell apart visually as long as you get a good look at them, and they're not just completely backlit. So the males in particular are easy to differentiate. So golden cheek warbler males, they have an all black head and back, and they don't have any yellow on their undersides. No yellow on the chest, no yellow on the vents. It's just pure white, snow white on underside. And as far on the face, it's just a solid black line. There's no smudgy auricle patch, no smudgy pattern on the cheek. It's just a purely golden cheek. They are the golden cheek warbler, not the smudgy cheeked warbler. Black-throated green warblers do have that smudgy cheek, and they have little bits of yellow on the underside and a greenish back. The females are a little bit harder to tell apart, but they still have most of the same patterns. Female golden cheek warblers look a lot like the males, except that their black eye stripe is a little bit thinner, and their back and head is more olive rather than black. Although there are some females that have a lot of black, almost solidly black cap and back. I have seen that before, but it's pretty uncommon. Most of the time, it's usually pretty olivey up there. That's pretty similar to the black-throated green warblers, which also have that olive back and head. But you'll notice that all black-throated green warblers have the smudgy cheek, whereas the golden cheek warbler females still have a straight black line. It might not be as bold as the males, but it's still a line. It's still not a smudge. Also, like the males, they have a pure white underbelly. There's no yellow under there. So as long as you can get a good look, you can tell them apart. And to be honest, if you see something that looks like a golden cheek warbler out in oak juniper woodland, it's probably a golden cheek warbler. The black-throated warblers absolutely do. They don't breed here. They're going to breed up in the northeast, but they do pass through here on migration, and sometimes you will find them in oak juniper woodland. Usually at least I usually more commonly see them out in savanna. They seem to prefer savanna over woodland, but you can find them in other habitat, but you don't usually come through in large numbers. So I will see a few every season, But most of the time, if you're in golden cheek warbler habitat, mostly what you're seeing are golden cheek warblers. And if you do accidentally count a black-throated green warbler as a golden cheek, it's not the end of the world. So we will, just as they look similar, they also sound similar, but there are some slight differences. So going through with the A song, the golden cheek warblers are much crazier than the black-throated green warblers. The black-throated green warblers have their little suits and ties and their little martini glasses. They're a little bit more proper. They're a little bit more tame. They have more of a Midwestern accent, whereas our golden cheek warblers have much more of a Southern drawl. So black-throated green warblers are just kind of stating that they're crazy, but golden cheek warblers are announcing that they are. So we'll listen to both of them. So we'll start off with the A song of the golden cheek warbler, starting now. Oh, hello. Yep, so that's some very drawn out, I'm so crazy. And black-throated greens, it's much more sedated. A little bit quieter, a little bit more angelic, still the same kind of basic mnemonic, just a different tone to it. So again, you can practice with Merlin, you can spot the difference, but for long you can tell the difference. And with their B songs are very similar. The main difference is that golden cheek warblers have a much cleaner sounding B song, whereas I'm starting to lose my voice here. Black-throated green warblers have a much buzzier, staticky song, like you're kind of hearing them through like an old radio. So we'll listen to them again, starting with the golden cheek. Pretty clean. And then we'll go with the black-throated green. And some lovely blackbirds in the distance. All right. So, again, good to practice these. All right. Got that. Does that. So the only other bird that can. Oh, hello. Okay. So the other bird that people sometimes. Still going. Okay. It's like a real one. All right. So sometimes people will get their golden cheek warblers confused with Buick wren's calls. Usually at a distance. So Buick's wren songs that are really far away and kind of fragmented, you can't hear the whole piece. Sometimes some elements of their songs sound similar to golden cheek warbler sounds, but especially the B song. But usually once you learn the difference, it's pretty easy to tell them apart. Okay, so now to wrap up, we can cover the do's. So be alert for dangerous animals, and bring plenty of water. Don't roll in the bull nettle, bring a cell phone, and generally travel with other volunteers if you can. If you can't, let somebody know where you are when they should expect you back. Have a good tag in, tag out system. Make sure that you have everything that you need to do the surveys and that you have fun. Don't forget water. And please don't, do any pitching or owl calls or audio playbacks, please. Try to, kind of keep, if people ask you what you're doing, just say that you're birding or bird watching. Try not to get too detailed about what you're looking for. Do not, try not to conduct surveys if your hearing is impaired. You can, and, move away from areas that birds are vocalizing alarm calls if you can, just to avoid, distracting the birds and endangering them. And stay on the trails and, all the normal type of stuff like that. So with that, if anybody has any questions, now's the time we can answer them.
Kip, this is Patsy. We had a request if we could get the slides in PDF format after, or would they be in the folder where they can view them again?
Yep, and they should already be in the folder. And so they're already in there. And we can we'll also upload the recording to the Dropbox as well, so that everybody will have access to that.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
And if anybody has a question, they can unmute themselves and ask it, huh?
Let's see, I'm seeing a few in the chat already. One that asks if we can do it surveys if the temperatures reach 80 to 90 degrees. Um, I'm generally okay with that. I mean, I used to do glow and cheek warbler surveys for years professionally on Camp Bullis, and actually we had thousands and thousands of point counts, and I kind of threw a lot of that into a model to see what effects weather would have on golden cheek warbler singing rates. And I could not find any relationship between temperature and their likelihood that they would sing, at least not above, like 50 degrees. And so it doesn't really seem like they're affected by the heat all that much. We would prefer you to do the surveys when it is below 80 degrees. So, just to be on the safe side, as well as for your own safety. But, again, if you're having the survey in May, it might only be below 80 degrees for like the first 30 minutes of the day, and then it might be too hot past 80 after that. So, it's oftentimes it's often just not practical to say that you're going to only do it when it's cool outside. Yeah. Let's see. They do, however, start calling less as the day progresses, though. That seems to be the biggest factor that affects their singing availability is one, the time of year it is, but also the time of day. So they are much more vocal earlier on. Usually not during immediately at sunrise. They usually are not a part of the dawn chorus like a lot of other birds. They usually wait until the sun is a little bit higher up before they start singing. They need to get kind of warmed up. But once the sun has been, above the horizon and they start singing, that's been their peak. And after that, throughout the day, they're going to start declining after that. Let's see. Okay, I think I saw all the questions in the comments. Does anybody else have any questions or jokes or anything like that? I guess not. All right, sounds good. Thank you, everybody, for coming here. And please feel free to contact me if you ever have any questions or anything like that. With that,
Do you have your mailing address anywhere in this information? I didn't see it.
let's see. I thought it said it on the bottom there, but it might.
I just see an email.
Oh, my mailing address. No, I don't have my mailing address here, but if you would like to send me your physical data sheets, feel free to send me an email, and I'll certainly be happy to tell you over email. I can
Okay.
add that in the future.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.